called thirstyhead.com. I'm a big Groovy and Grails advocate. And it's tough because, there's another great talk going on upstairs. Jeff Brown is doing how to write Twitter in 40 minutes in Grails. So if you get bored here, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Go upstairs, go see Jeff. He's a great speaker as well. But Thirstyhead, beyond Groovy and Grails, has really begun expanding the past year or so into HTML5 and some NoSQL databases as well. So I'm not doing any NoSQL databases. You have plenty of NoSQL talks here. But this talk and the next talk as well are really going to be focusing on HTML5. This talk is, of course, just about the language, HTML5, the markup. The next talk is all about microformats and the semantic web, lowercase s, not uppercase s. Let me start with an easy question. Right? How many of you in here know HTML? There you go. Absolutely. Now asking another question. How many of you have ever had any formal training in HTML? Look around. Look around. Crickets chirping, right? Now think about that. Let me ask you another question. How many of you are Java developers? I knew that. There are a lot of Java developers. How many of you had any formal training in Java? Well, yeah, of course. You're not going to sit down in front of Java and say, here you go, knock yourself out. What was that public static void main string array args thing again, right? I mean, you're not going to be effective in Java unless you've had some formal training. But yet HTML is one of those things that are like, oh, come on, it's easy. It's just a bunch of pointy braces, right? You got to be able to pick up on that. And so what I really want to do and what I'm really excited about is this might be your first opportunity to really dig in to HTML5 and see what's going on. And it's not kids stuff. There's some really, really interesting stuff going on, yes, even for software engineers. There's some deep, deep stuff going on in there. So what we're going to talk about in the next little bit is four major items. There are all kinds of things going on. But we're going to focus on the new items, the new elements in HTML5. We're going to talk about specifically some of the new form widgets you can throw on board. We're going to talk about mobile support. We're going to talk about video. Now, I saved the best for last because anytime everyone hears about HTML5, they immediately think video. And granted, there is cool stuff going on in there. But most business developers aren't doing a lot with video right now. And so I want to focus on the things that you can start using right now as a business developer. In the off chance you're not working for YouTube, there's still an awful lot of interesting stuff going on in HTML5. But this is going to be a really important concept for you. You like that? Yeah, I like that as well. Yeah. This is going to be a concept that's going to float through both talks, not just this talk, but the next one as well, that semantics are really important. And I know I used an uppercase S there, but the semantics I'm talking about are lowercase s. I'm not going to go on about OWL and griddle and RDF and all those kinds of things. I want to talk about using tags that are semantically correct, that mean what they say. Kind of like that. Yeah. So, I know this is kind of small. Don't worry, there's not going to be a ton of code up here. There's not a test. But this is what I think is pretty typical of your HTML these days. You got a lot of divs. We got div ID equals header, div ID equals nav, section, these kinds of things. What's a div? How many of you know? What's a div? Nobody knows. All right. Someone's got to know. No? That's a division of code. It's a semantically named hunk of code. We know P's are paragraphs. We know A's are our anchors. We know IMGs are our images and everything. And we got these divs as well. There's just a named hunk of code as we go along. And I would guarantee you that every one of your websites has a header, has a footer, has nav, has those kinds of things. But yet we're left dealing with these kinds of generic divs. And so what does HTML5 bring to the party? Header tags, footer tags, nav tags, article tags, section tags. Once again, this is what HTML4 looks like. This is what HTML5 looks like. Radical, isn't it? Radical. Yeah, no, there's an awful lot more going on here. But again, this is what I was talking about. These are semantic tags. All of a sudden, this is a lot easier to look at because semantically we're dealing with, oh, this is the nav section. These are my headers. These are my articles in here. Not revolutionary, evolutionary. As a matter of fact, that's what the W3C says about the HTML5 spec, the World Wide Web Consortium. They say, we're not pushing new features onto you. We're actually looking at what you're already doing on the web and trying to have a spec capture what you're already doing on the web. They literally say that we're paving over the cow paths. And that's a good way to think about this. As a Java developer, you can't start using Java features before the new spec comes out. It's spec first, code to the spec. In the web, it's exactly the opposite. The web is so mutable, so flexible, that what the W3C is doing is capturing our industry-wide best practices and codifying it after the fact. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, how many of you are using HTML5 right now? Oh, a couple hands. Good, good, good. How many of you think that HTML5 is being used out in the wild, or is it still pretty experimental? Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a little company, Mom Pa's shop. They're, kind of an R&D form more than anything else. Google? Absolutely. Google is using HTML5 right now. Now, as I go through these companies in just a bit, I want you to understand what I'm doing. Over here, this is the browser that these guys are writing, and of course, HTML5 plays a big, big role in Chrome. But they're also eating their own dog food. If you go to google.com right now and look at the doc type, you will see that Google right now is serving up HTML5. Google, view source, doc type, HTML. This isn't experimental. This isn't kind of wait and see. This is kind of right here, right now. And so for the next couple of these guys, we're going to see that, yeah, absolutely, Google is betting big on HTML5, not only in the software that they're developing, but also in the website that they are producing. Apple as well. Safari has got outstanding HTML5 support. And if we go to apple.com and do view source, we see that they're using HTML5, serving it up to the masses right now. If we go to Firefox, not surprising, browser manufacturer vendor, a ton of HTML5 support. They're using HTML5 on Mozilla.org as well. Any Opera users out here? Anyone? Boy, poor little Opera. It's a little web browser that couldn't it, Now, are any of you carrying Crackberries? Blackberries? Yeah? Now, we're all developers. We're not business guys. So, Opera's pervasive on Blackberries. The BlackBerry ships with such a craptaculous native browser that people go out of their way to download something. It's really fast and it's very standards compliant. How many of you have a Wii at home? You've been surfing the web on your Wii? You're Opera users. That's Opera under the covers doing its thing on there as well. Now, you'll notice that Opera's got outstanding HTML5 support. Ironically, they're not using it on their own web page. And I do check every time. I'm not picking on them. Okay, a little bit. I'm picking on them just a little bit here, that if we go to opera.com, waiting, there we go, and we do a view source on them, and oh, thank you for playing, they're still using XHTML. That's kind of a bummer, isn't it? You got to kind of be behind the specs that you're pushing, but that's okay. So I've covered all the major browsers now, right? Let's see, Chrome and Firefox and yeah, Safari, and no. Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah. Even these guys have HTML5 support baked in. Now, they're talking about it coming in IE9, absolutely, but I really believe them that this is important to them that they're putting out. I haven't looked at any of the early releases, but people who are looking at early releases of IE9 are saying it's good stuff. They're really kind of getting it right. Interesting. So we've got now a firm commitment from all of the major players on the desktop for HTML5. Yeah? But what about... Yeah. All right, here we go. Show of hands. How many of you have one of these? Yeah, all right, very good. How many of you have Androids? See, we can all get along. You're sitting next to each other, holding hands, singing Kumbaya, right? All of that. Yeah, absolutely. The mobile platform is exciting for HTML. I would almost argue it's even more exciting. Do you remember the day when browsers were kind of on your cell phone? I remember I bought a Motorola Razr. I was so excited. That was a sexy new cell phone. And oh, look, it's got the browser. And I used it once. You're holding yours up. How often do you use your browser? Almost never, right? Yeah, that was, never. Not even almost, never. Yeah, that was back when phones were phones, right? You used them for that kind of vocal stuff. Yeah. It's funny now that cell phones are on the leading edge of HTML5. There are a lot of features in mobile Safari and mobile Chrome as well, and it's their desktop counterparts that are lagging and playing catch up. So there's a lot of really exciting stuff going on. This is one of the slides that I was updating furiously right before I got in here. The latest data we have is 2010 of this year, July of this year. But these are market shares, and the colors are a little bit blurred out here, I apologize. But this first bar is the market share in September of last year, 09. This bar here is the market share, latest data we have, July of this year. And you see some interesting trends. Not surprising, RIM, that's BlackBerry, had a big hunk of the market. They're now down to just under 40%. Apple is holding pretty firm at a quarter of the market. Microsoft is dropping precipitously. Palm dropping precipitously. Any of you have a Palm phone in your? Do you really? I am so glad you do. I don't want to own one myself, but I'm so glad you have them because it's WebOS, isn't it? It's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all the way down. I love the idea. Not enough to own one, but I love the idea of this phone. This is what I think is most impressive, isn't it? Over a year, dramatic 14.5-point increase in market share. And it's really coming at the expense of all the other major players. Apple's holding pretty steady on this kind of stuff, but it's really coming at the expense of all these other players. So let's circle back now for a moment and think about the vendors. We said that Google is big behind HTML5. We said Palm, WebOS, all the way down, big behind HTML5. We'll skip this one. Apple, big behind HTML5, right? And then RIM. We said that they've got a really crummy native browser right now. But RIM has announced that their native browser is going to be WebKit compatible as well. There are 3 major HTML rendering engines. Help me out. I'll give you one. WebKit, absolutely. WebKit is Chrome and Safari. What does Firefox use? Gecko is the other one. And what does IE use? Trident, very good. Extra points there. And so whenever you hear anyone talking about WebKit, WebKit's open source. It's pretty pervasive in there. WebKit's got outstanding HTML5 support, so you can pretty safely conflate the two. Gecko is its own thing and everything, but it's got pretty decent HTML5 support. We're working on that. The Trident engine doesn't have it now, but they're working on it. They're working on it for the browser, the desktop, and they're working on it for the phone as well. The Windows 7 phone, do I ask? Do any of you have a Windows 7 phone? Yeah? No? All right. I've heard that it's actually a pretty impressive phone. But it doesn't have HTML5 support, which is just unbelievable that Microsoft, once again, kind of came to the party a day late and $1 short. I can't beat up on them too much because they do say that it is coming to their phone, it is coming to their browser. They haven't had that support and tried it, but that's what they're actively working on. So we'll give them that. So, this is what I think is more interesting. Remember that Microsoft represented about 10% of the market. So about 90% of your smartphones in your pocket right now, HTML5 compatible, out of the box, ready to go right now. But this is what I think is even more interesting. This is traffic based on device. See, the big blue wedge there is the iPhone. The red wedge there is Android. So fully 75% of the web traffic coming from your smartphones is coming from HTML5 ready OSs and browsers. RIM is this 12%. Microsoft is about 4% of the actual traffic. So regardless of whether or not they have HTML5 support, it doesn't matter because they are a footnote when it comes to handheld smartphones, both in terms of market share and traffic generated. So this first part of the talk is meant to get you all fired up about HTML5, right? I'm sure some of you are skeptical, right? But this, I think, is the killer slide right here. This is where I want you to pay attention to. Have any of you heard of the O'Reilly curve before? All right, you've heard of it, so correct me if I'm wrong, if I tell any lies up here. So Doug Kaye came up with this trend. He says that, okay, this is the cost to implement a technology over time. And so what that means, this is not hard to figure out, that early on in a life cycle, it's very expensive to implement technology. Because we don't have the tool sets, and we don't have vendors, and we don't have support, we don't have smart people doing all these kinds of things. Over time, it comes all but free to use that technology. Think about HTML. You used to have to pay for your browsers, right? Now you get browsers on your toaster. And so HTML is all but free to use at this point. And so this is one end of the curve that I find is interesting. But then when you overlay it with another curve, this is the value curve. When there aren't many people using it, that technology ain't worth much. But over time, it becomes increasingly valuable to have that kind of support. And so conventional wisdom might tell you that you want to try to time yourself to hit right there. But no, we're developers, we're consultants. We need to be leading on those kinds of things. And so Doug says you need to back up this curve. You can't wait for there to be experienced staff in order to start learning a technology. You need to back up and back up and back up. And when do you need to back up? When the first O'Reilly book comes out on a technology. I don't know if he's tracked this statistically or if this is anecdotally, but if you think about it, there's a whole bunch of technology out there floating around, isn't it? How do we judge which technology we should begin paying attention to? First thing I do is I go out and I Google it. Are there a lot of people blogging about it? Are there a lot of people writing articles about it? Are there a lot of these kinds of things? But if you go to Amazon, it's a pretty good bellwether. It's a pretty good canary in the coal mine. That if you go to Amazon and you look for technology and there's a book or two written on it, you're like, okay, it's legit. If it's not yet, well, that doesn't mean it's never going to come. But these books take about 12 months to write, so you got a bit of a lead time. So they've done their due diligence. Someone is committed to writing one of these books. They figure out that, yeah, this technology is worth spending a year of my life, blood, sweat, and tears, trying to write a book to discuss this. There are several authors in the audience who are nodding knowingly, saying, yes, we've been through this. Writing books is no picnic. So this book, HTML5, I've read it. It's a really, really outstanding book. But I'm not shilling for Mark Pilgrim. The entire content of the book is available for free online as well. So a lot of the examples I'm going to discuss in here, you can find as well at diveintohtml5.org. Diveintohtml5.org. Literally is the content of the book there. If you like it, buy it. It'll help them out. Yeah. But you can begin experimenting with these technologies without dropping a dime. So I told you there are 4 things that we are going to focus on. We're going to focus on the new semantic elements of HTML. We're going to talk about form enhancements. We're going to talk about mobile support and videos. So let's get down to it. The first new element worth talking about is the element itself, the doc type up there. Remember these lovely doc types? Quick, what doc type are you using in your app? I don't know, right? There are 15 different doc types out there. Can you name all 15? All right, well, there's HTML 4.01 strict, and there's transitional, and there's frame set, and then there's the XHTML, and then I'm done, right? I can't remember all of these crazy doc types. And so now in HTML5, the doc type is just this. Doc type, HTML. And the reason for this is very subtle but very important. When Tim Berners-Lee invented the web, he's the dude that wrote it all back in the 90s. He started with the mindset that HTML is kind of like SGML. Right? But it's kind of a watered down version. So for the first 10 years or so of the web, HTML was kind of like SGML light. And then for the next 10 years, all through the 90s, all through the aughts, if you will, XHTML, because hey, we use both pointy brackets and things like that. Is HTML XML? It really isn't. You can write well-formed HTML, and I do, and I encourage you to do as well. I never wrote XHTML, but I always wrote well-formed HTML. But XHTML is dead. The W3C has officially dissolved the XHTML committee. So they said that basically HTML is not SGML. They said HTML is not XML. After 20 years, we've said, you know what, HTML is just HTML. We kind of get it now, right? We kind of understand what this is, and it's its own thing, and HTML is HTML. And people always ask at this point, I know what you're thinking. Hold on, it's coming to me. Yeah. You're thinking, well, what about HTML6? Or 5.0.1 or 5.0.1.1.2.revb, right? Well, the nice thing about this, and I'm going to show you why, is if you use this doc type, you are forward compatible. So what this is a dramatic simplification. It's a recognition that HTML is nothing but HTML, but if you do it correctly, it's also forward compatible. So here's what I'm talking about. Here are a number of new elements that come out. Header and footer. Now don't get head confused with header. Head is where you put all your CSS and your JavaScript, unless you're Google and you put your JavaScript on the bottom and your CSS at the top, all that kind of good stuff, right? But I mean, head is head, body is body. What we're talking about here are headers and footers, semantic tags that mean what they say and say what they mean. What's especially interesting is you aren't just limited to headers for your page. You can have headers in any block elements. So you can create a section that has a header and a footer. You can create an article that has a header and a footer in there as well. Because logically, this is what it is, right? It's a header for this and a footer for this. Nav doesn't do anything special, but it's a way for you to semantically identify the navigation elements. If you're trying to make accessible websites, if you've got screen readers, the best practice of the day is to take your nav elements, put them at the bottom of the HTML, and then CSS them back up to the top, because screen readers run from the top to the bottom, and you don't want screen readers to go through all of your nav elements like this. Well, well-written screen readers now will see the nav element and just skip over it, rather than putting it down here and marking it back up here and everything, because it's semantically marked, because it's not just a div, because it's a nav, screen readers can skip over that. Sections, articles, asides, these kinds of things. This isn't a complete list by any stretch, but it's the important ones. It's the ones you'll be interested in right away. And so what you're going to do is you're going to sit down and you're going to start using those. And this is what that first one looked like. Div ID equals header. Div ID equals footer. And then you're going to start using these new HTML5 tags and you're going to say, oh, darn it, my browser doesn't support it. Okay, maybe next year. Yeah? But it's okay. It really is. This is how you HTML5 enable all browsers, except for IE, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But for all sane browsers, this is how you do it. You go in and identify the new things. There's article, there's canvas, there's details, there's figure, all these things, and you say display block. If you don't know CSS, you do know HTML. You know that some things are block level elements. Your P's are blocks. Anything with block has an implicit line return at the end of it. So your P's are blocks, your H1s are blocks, or those kinds of things. You also have span tags, things like bold and italic and anchor and things like that, things that don't have an implicit line return. So all you have to do is instruct your browsers to begin treating all of these new HTML5 elements as block elements. And then you will get that kind of thing available. No tricks. I mean, this is what Google is using and Apple is using and Mozilla and everything else. They're giving instructions to a browser saying, you might not recognize this element, but here you go. This is how I want you to treat it. And this is really important. This is very important. This is why I said HTML is forward compatible. Because if WebKit comes across a tag that it doesn't recognize, it says, oh, all right, I'll go ahead and display it anyway. I don't much care. If Gecko comes across a tag, if you have a foo tag and a bar tag and a baz tag in there, if it doesn't recognize it, it'll say, okay, well, I'll just kind of pass it through. I won't do anything with it. I'll pass it through, so you can turn around and style it up however you want. How does IE, Trident, deal with tags it doesn't recognize? It makes them invisible. It hides them. Thank you very much. Yes. Vendor lock-in. on a browser that will never be forward compatible. Now they are fixing that obviously with IE9, they're moving forward with that. But all hope is not lost. Someone discovered that if you use JavaScript to programmatically add that element back into the DOM, then IE recognizes it. IE will display things it doesn't recognize, but if you use document create element, then it will display it again. So this is a very simple workaround for IE. I hesitate to call it a hack. We prefer Shiv. Or actually, I'll give you a slide at the very end of this talk, polyfill is what the cool kids are beginning to talk to it. We used to historically program to the least common denominator, i.e. 6, and then know that it would always scale up. What most development shops are doing now are coding to the most advanced browsers and backfilling functionality for browsers with special needs. Like IE. So literally, this one line of code right here, and I will demonstrate it to you as well. Google uses it, Apple uses it, Thirstyhead uses it. You've got a block that says, if you're IE, go ahead and download this script right here. It's the HTML5 script. But if you don't want to do that, here is the contents of that script in its entirety. It simply walks through all the new HTML5 elements, and it calls document create element on it. So to make IE HTML5 compatible, you add the elements. For all browsers, you use the CSS display block, and you're done. I'm not overselling the case. So let's talk about form enhancements. Form enhancements. How does this get improved on? This is the gold standard, isn't it? If I don't need one of those widgets, I just don't need one. Yeah? What's amazing is these are the widgets that have been around since the very beginning of HTML, and they haven't been revved since. We all know about checkboxes and radio buttons and passwords and combo boxes and things like that. Untouched since the beginning of time, since time really didn't exist before HTML, before the web. I can literally say since the beginning of time, this is all of the form elements we've needed. So HTML5 finally gives us some enhancements. They give us some improvements. They say we can now say input type equals tel for telephone. Input type equals search. Input type equals URL, email, date, time, range, color. Now bear in mind, these are semantic tags. It's up to your browser to do something special with it in terms of how it renders that. But we now can begin semantically identifying these. Yes? The question is, because they're semantic, can you add your own types? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, this is from Dive into HTML5. This is Mark Pilgrim. I'm channeling him right now. I loved this paragraph when I read it. He's like, all right, so I'm building a new form, and I say input type equals email. And I'm speaking as Mark right now. I was about to write a sentence that started in browsers that don't support type equals email, but then I stopped myself. Why? Because I don't know what that means. Every browser supports this. Because if you say type equals social security number, and the browser doesn't know what to do with it, it defaults back to type equals text. Every single browser on the market, including IE. You can say type equals shoe size. They're going to say, I don't know about that. Okay, looks like a text field. All right? And so this is what I mean by forward compatible. If you say doctype HTML in there, and they come up with a whole slew of new elements, it won't break. Because they're like, oh, hey, guess what? All right, this thing's an element now. This thing's a shoe size. This is a social security number. Here's where it gets cool, though. Have you ever noticed on your iPhone, I'm sure Android does the same thing, that we now have soft keyboards? We have virtual keyboards. Have you ever been typing in a URL and all of a sudden on your Mac, you get on your iPhone, you get a .com button? And you say, oh gosh darn it, where's the .com button on my keyboard? Right? I love that. I wish my keyboard had a .com button. I type it so often. But on a phone, you can do that. If you are using input type equals URL, you'll get a soft keyboard that is just for typing in characters valid for URLs. If you say type equals email, you'll get the big @ symbol. That's what I'm showing you right here, space and dots and things like that. And so if you start using these, You get the benefit. I'm angry now when I'm using my iPhone. I was like, wait a second, where's the right keyboard for this? Oh, they're using type equals text, of course. Yeah? Yes? It's a great question. I'm going to paraphrase. The question is, what if the browser doesn't do the right thing with one of these things? What if validation fails? What if it does these kinds of things? The browser does none of that. These are simply semantic tags. So we've got new tags like search in there. You just say input type equals search. That doesn't automatically auto-wire that field to Google or Bing or anything like that. All it is semantically identifying that as a search field. If you pull this up on the Mac, it'll kind of round the corners a little bit. It'll give you this kind of behavior. So if we come up here, rounded corners, I start typing in something up here and everything, it'll give it this kind of behavior, but it won't auto-wire it to Google. It's a semantic tag, not an implementation.
So, for example, there's not any concept of it doing validation or social security.
I'm going to repeat your question again. There's no concept of it doing any validation on a social security number or an email address or anything like that. No, absolutely not. That's still up to you to implement. Yeah?
So in browsers that don't support these types and they default back to the text, can you still use like selector engines to find by that type?
Oh, see, this is a page shill. I'm not going to repeat your question because I'm going to talk about it right now on the very next slide. But the question is, is there some way we can... I said I wasn't going to say it. Now I'm going to say it. Yeah. The question is there any way to detect if the browser supports this or doesn't support it so we can do the right thing accordingly? Absolutely. Let me stay here real quick and just show you. There's some cool little elements like sliders and spinners and things like that. We say input type equals range, input type equals number, and gives you this kind of thing. But in terms of auto-detecting if your browser does this kind of thing or not, an outstanding library called Modernizer. Modernizer. They couldn't afford a vowel. Modernizer absolutely is a toolkit, very small, well under 5K, that allows you to essentially say, all right, input type equals date, name equals birthday. If there's no input type equals date, then go in and do this kind of stuff. And this create date picker that you're seeing in there, that's just pseudocode. That doesn't exist. It's up to you to implement this thing. Modernizer is not a shiv. It's not going to give you those features. It's strictly a detection library, so you can detect if it's there. If it's there, I'll use it. If not, I will backfill with what you're already doing today. That's where you'll wedge your legacy JavaScript code. Yeah? And if you want to check this out, I encourage you to go see Find Me by IP. Kind of a weird name, Find Me by IP. But if we come in here, findmebyip.com, they're using Modernizer under the hood. And what they'll do is they'll immediately pop up and say, there we go. This is what you're using, Firefox 3.6 on OS 10. Here's my user agent string. And here are all the CSS features and HTML5 features I support. So I support border radius and box shadow and all that. Here, let me bump this up a little bit so you can see it. Here I support HTML5 video and local storage, something we're going to talk about in just a bit here. Here are some of the things. I support OGG and WAV files. I don't support MP3 and MP4As. So it's a really nice website, so you can just tell at a glance what you're looking at. And so if I were trying to run Safari, go back to the same website, Find Me by IP. Waiting. And it's going to come back and say you're using Safari, and here are the features that Safari supports, and here are the features that Firefox supports. There's Safari. I support these kinds of things versus Firefox. So here's what Firefox supports. Here's what Safari supports. And you'll see that in most every browser you hit, there are an awful lot of green. Oh, and then I get to all the red X's in Safari. Yeah, see all those green checkboxes in there? Yeah. But yeah, you'll end up seeing, as a general rule, more green checkboxes than not than when you go to Find Me by IP. Good questions. You guys enjoying this so far? Yeah? Okay, absolutely. Hold your applause. Let's talk about mobile support. Because I really do got to tell you, this is where the future is. I end up using this little browser in my pocket all the time. I travel, so I'm in an airport. What do? I surf the web, I go to Dig, I go to Twitter, I go those kinds of things and everything. I probably log more time on my phone's browser than I do on my desktop browser. And so mobile support is a way that you can begin not taking the whole internet with you, but grabbing a little handful of the internet with you and put it in your pocket and carry it with you. When the flight attendant says, please put your internet browser in airplane mode, some of these things are the way you can continue using web apps, which is really cool. HTML5rocks.com, a great resource for you if you want to see some of these nice tutorials. Done a really nice job of walking you through step by step. HTML5rocks.com. And again, my slide decks are going to be available for you after the conference, so you don't have to worry about it. But they're here talking about the application cache, app cache. Now what this means is this is your browser cache on steroids. We all know that browsers cache up your data, right? And as a matter of fact, if you're really doing a lot of good hardcore HTML development, what you're doing is from the server side, hinting your browser as to how long you should hold on to these things. If you ever go to Google Maps, you know that the first time you download those tiles, it takes a long time. But the longer you use Google Maps, the faster it gets. Because the more tiles you have loaded up in cache, and so it pops right up, makes it almost instantaneous. So state of the art has been hinting from the server side. I need to do far future expire headers, and I need to do e-tags and all these kinds of things. With HTML5, they give you the ability to do this from the client side. And so while I think the cool application is going to be for offline browsing, because literally what happens when you do with this on an iPhone is it doesn't save a URL to your desktop, it saves the app to your desktop. This is the way you can do app development on an iPhone and bypass the App Store. Because you have all those resources there. So I think this is really interesting, exciting for devices that are connected some of the time, not all of the time. But you can also begin using these things to speed up regular old desktop apps as well. Because it gives you the ability to control the speed. Cache hits are always going to be faster than HTTP requests. And so it's a win-win scenario. Your clients get more performant apps, and you're reducing the server load. Everyone wins. Yeah? But the way you do this is really straightforward. In your HTML, you just say manifest, and you give it a pointer to a manifest file. And this manifest file ends up looking like this. You say, all right, these are the resources I want you to cache. These are the resources that you must be online in order to use, network, and fallback, which is the coolest. So in this case right here, if you make a request for main.py, it's going to fall back to static.html. Anything in this images large directory is going to be replaced with this offline JPEG file. And so what you effectively have now are the three verbs you need: cache, network, and fallback. I guess maybe they're adjectives. I don't know. But you got three keywords at least that describe what you need to deal with these kinds of things. Oh, and by the way, this app cache is supported on all major browsers. Everything except one. Yeah? Yeah, don't point to my Mac when I say those kinds of things. Oh, that. Okay, all right. Yeah. This app cache is supported across all mobile browsers and all desktop browsers except IE. IE7 will support it, but right now there's no support for it. And so you could end up doing something as simple as this. You could end up saying, hey, guess what? I'm going to define a single fallback in here right now, but then network has an asterisk in it, which means, hey, guess what? For this app, you have to be online all the time, right? For all these kinds of resources. And then you can cache up some basic things like this. Yeah. Outstanding point. He said now that we are beyond the era of unlimited data plans, unless you're grandfathered in, But even my time's numbered as well. Yeah, that this is a way that for mobile developers, you can really help be frugal on those kinds of things. I don't think anyone's going to use your app because you're sipping their bandwidth instead of gulping it. But you're absolutely right. It's a way that you can say, hey, hit these resources once, download them, everyone wins. Yeah, excellent point. Yeah. The app cache has life cycle. Uncached, idle, checking, downloading, update ready, obsolete, all these kinds of things. If you've done any Ajax development, this feels very similar, doesn't it? Yeah. You got this enum that defines all those kinds of states. And then you can hit this stuff programmatically as well in JavaScript. You can say JavaScript app cache update, app cache swap cache. You can do that stuff. And everything can be an event driven as well. I didn't capture it, but if you looked about down here, on this page, HTML5 Rocks, they list out all the ways that you can set up event listening on your cache as well, so you can be reactive instead of prescriptive. So app cache is one thing that I find incredibly exciting, but the other thing is not kind of reactive storing, but proactive storing. By actually giving me a suitcase to begin storing my stuff. And so people call this a variety of different things. You'll hear it called local storage. You'll hear it called web storage. You'll hear it called WebDB, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. But here's what I love about this. Across the board, including IE5, everyone supports this. Everyone supports this. Start using it right now today. Yep. And basically, what HTML5 storage is key value pairs. You know all that NoSQL stuff we've been hearing about all weekend? Here we are again. Key value pairs on the browser. Every URL gets up to 5 meg of storage. I don't think I mentioned this before. For app cache, you can cache up to 5 meg. For local storage, you can store up to 5 meg on these kinds of things as well. So basically what you can do is you can begin writing out to this local storage. This is from Mark Pilgrim's website, Dive into HTML5. He's got some kind of game. He basically goes in and says, all right, well, if you support local storage, then use this hash map notation. Local storage, Halma game in progress equals that variable. Local storage, Halma piece equals Halma selected pieces. And he's storing the state of the app locally on there as well. These two chapters, these two concepts kind of work together hand in hand, don't they? He writes some kind of game that's kind of a Go-like game, Othello kind of game, these kinds of things. But he basically says, all right, using app cache, I'm going to make sure that all the JavaScript downloads and all the HTML and the images of the little chips that bounce around and things like that. So I'm going to make sure those things are cached so my app runs. But then I'm going to use this to store the state of the game and top scores and authentication and whatever you need to do these kinds of things. Isn't that cool? And it's just so easy. Now, I'm a Groovy guy, and so I look at this and I'm like, well, of course. You know, I'm going to say session.user equals whatever, and session.role equals whatever. And now, at the client side, I can say local storage dot high score equals. Yeah? Very, very cool stuff. Now, it's very important, and the terms are a bit ambiguous. So let me be very clear that web storage key value pair is supported on every single browser. Start using it today, right now. Web database or web SQL or whatever you want to call it from there and everything, far from ubiquitous and probably won't ever be. Because you'll see that Safari and Chrome and your mobile guys use it as well, but IE doesn't support it and they said they never will, and Firefox doesn't support it and they said they never will. The way the rest of these guys use it is actually a SQLite implementation behind the scenes. And so this is irony upon ironies, that Microsoft says we're not going to implement it because SQL is GPL, and Firefox says we're not going to implement it because SQLite is GPL. Go figure, right? Finally, something that Mozilla and Microsoft could agree on. Neither one of them liked the license of SQLite, and so neither one of them are going to implement it. So for the foreseeable future, if you're going to use these kinds of things, you're going to be using key value pairs, not writing SQL against your local thing. Now, if you're targeting a particular platform, iPhone, Android, things like that, you can use a database, and your data's allowances for this are a little bit higher. You get 25 meg. And this is 25 meg per URL. Per unique URL. Just like your cookies, Except cookies are limited to what, 6.5 bytes or something like that. Here we're talking about 5 meg, and for databases, 25 meg. So, save the best for last here. Video. When everyone talks about HTML5, they talk about video, right? This is the excitement of what's going on. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you saw the W3C memo that just came out last week. They said, oh yeah, by the way, we don't think you should use HTML5. I'm not making a joke. The W3C issued a memorandum saying, we don't think you should use HTML5, that spec that we just wrote. Yeah? And they said, because the video spec isn't solidified yet, and we don't think you should do this. And who am I to disagree with them? But I'm disagreeing with them. There is so much you can do outside of this video tag. That's right here and right now across all these browsers. That for you to not use this just because this video tag isn't supported is kind of silly. Yeah. So, this chapter in the book maybe was one of my favorite chapters because I kind of vaguely knew about MP4 and H.264 and Flash Video and OGG and these kinds of things. And Mark Pilgrim did an outstanding job describing this. He says basically at the end of the day, all of these files that we're downloading are containers. So you've got the MP4 container. You've got the OGG container. You've got the WVA, Windows Video, WVM file format. That's a container as well. And then inside of this container, you have an audio channel and a video channel. And so when we're talking about QuickTime movies, what we're really saying is that's the movie container with an H.264 video channel and an MP3 audio channel. When we're talking about OGG, you might have played around with OGG Vorbis, which is audio. OGG is a container. Vorbis is video. Theora is... Or I did that wrong. Vorbis is audio, and Theora is video. So there's even a new one out there that Google is beginning to push called WebM. WebM is yet another container that we can do these kinds of things. And yes, I understand that there is not a single container/codec combination that will work across all browsers. But we've dealt with this before. I don't think any of you should be using HTML because we haven't agreed on an image format yet. I mean, come on, how could this possibly work? Some of you are using PNGs, and some of you are using JPEGs, and some of you are using GIF. There's no way that can work. So let's hold off on the web until we can all agree on a single image format, okay? Will you agree with me on that? Hold with me in solidarity? No? All right, you're smarter than I am then. All right, so absolutely, this is what the video tag looks like. It looks just like the image tag. Image source equals video source equals. You can give it width and height, but this is where it gets cool. You can spread out that video tag and you can say source, 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 source in there. And what it'll do is it'll start reading at the top of the list. If it understands that codec, it'll play it. If it doesn't, it'll go to the next on the list. If it doesn't know that, it'll go to the next, it'll go to the next. At the end of the chapter, Mark Pilgrim gives you this. And this works across all browsers 100% of the time. He starts with an MP4, fails over to WebM, fails over to OGG, fails over to Flash with the embedded element right in the middle of that. And at the very end, he's got a paragraph tag that says, hey, you don't have any codecs installed, click here to download these images. This is future compatible, works across 100% of the browsers right now. Yeah? People say, when do you think HTML5 is going to be ready? When do you think it's going to cross the chasm? When should we really begin paying attention to it right now? When I'm in business situations, I say when YouTube flips to HTML5 video, and they already have. They're still serving up Flash, but you know that you can't get Flash on these and iPads and everything else. So they already are dual encoding all their videos. They've got H.264 to support your iPad and your iPhone, and they got Flash to support everything else. So as soon as the tide turns and they flip that bit over to H.264, or to HTML5 video, I should say, I think we could say that HTML5 is probably mainstream. That's what I say when I'm in business situations. When I'm not in business situations, I say, once the porn industry flips to the video tag, Google for iPhone porn. I'm not going to do it for you here, but Google for it. You'll see the HTML tag being used out in the wild. And these guys aren't listening to W3C. Why wouldn't they listen? Anyway. So, but wait, there's more. This is the last thing I'm going to talk about here. It's cool that we've got these different videos. And a little bit of geekery, the way all these things work, they're progressive downloads. All of them, whether you're dealing with Flash, you're dealing with MP4, or anything else, what they do is they move all the header, all the information to the front of the file, so when the file downloads, it's got enough to begin playing, but it plays while the file is downloading. That's why we get buffers all the time. If your playhead gets ahead of the download speed of your connection, buffers until it catches up and moves on. This is the future of the web right here. HTTP live streaming. Granted, I am an Apple fanboy, but they have submitted this as a feature to the IETF. And what this means is we're getting out of the progressive download game, and we are actually streaming 10-second segments of your video. So if you go through your video right now, you're going to encode it as OGG or MP4 or anything like that. But then you're going to go into a stream segmenter, and this is a one-liner command that basically takes your video, whacks it into 10-second segments, it's user configurable, and then serves it up with its own manifest file. Now this manifest file is not the HTML app cache manifest file I'm talking about. This is an M3U file. If you've done any kind of stream casting at all, done any of these things, this is an existing format that everyone and their brother already knows how to read. But basically what it does is it turns your videos into segments. Segment 1.ts, 2.ts, and 3.ts. And if you've ever looked at DVDs, they use MPEG-2 as their codec. That's what they're using right here. So they're using a codec that everyone already knows how to read, MPEG-2, and they're using a file format for that streamcasting that everyone knows how to run. And what's really cool about this is if I'm sitting here on Wi-Fi watching video and I walk out the door, your client is smart enough to know what its bandwidth constraints are, and so it can start asking for the 3G version of that video rather than the high bandwidth version of that video. It will seamlessly flip from one stream to the other without you even noticing. This is cool stuff. It supports DRM, which I'm not all that excited about, but it also means that it can be commercialized. And that's what hurt MP3, and that's what hurt a lot of these file formats. You can bake that stuff in so you can start streaming videos at the bandwidth, the most bandwidth you can consume based on these kinds of things. And you serve it up from Apache. This is not a special video server. This is literally Apache because it's a bunch of 10-second video files with a manifest. This is really cool stuff. And if you've watched any recent Apple events, any of the WW conferences, any of the Steve Jobs keynotes, anything like that, you are already using this technology. This technology is here and now in Safari Desktop, iPhone, iPad, anything with a QuickTime plugin. You're already using this. You didn't even realize it. A lot of stuff to cover, and we didn't even get to all of it, man. So there are a couple more websites for you. HTML5demos.com is where you can go in and start playing around with Canvas and video and SVG and all the other cool features, geolocation, API. You can visit this in your browser and see if it works or not because they're live demos. For IE developers, if you Google on polyfills, and specifically HTML5 polyfills, this is a GitHub project. It is about 150 links for all the different ways you can backfill this functionality for essentially IE. But that's what I want you to leave you with right now is historically we've programmed for the least common denominator. Stop it. Let's program to HTML5 and backfill what we need for lesser browsers rather than letting them limit what we offer to the rest of the world. And that's how real innovation is going to happen in the browser space. This, my friends, was HTML5. Yeah?